911 operators. What is that one call that you could never forget? Story 1. I had a call that started out pretty dumb but was actually pretty serious. 911. Where is you emergency? 123 Main Saint. Okay, what's going on there? I'd like to order a pizza for delivery. Oh great, another prank call. Ma'am, you've reached 911. Yeah, I know. Can I have a large with half pepperoni, half mushroom and peppers? I'm sorry. You know you've called 911, right? Yeah. Do you know how long it will be? Okay, ma'am. Is everything okay over there? Do you have an emergency? Yes, I do. And you can't talk about it because there's someone in the room with you. Moment of realization. Yes, that's correct. Do you know how long it will be? I have an officer about a mile from your location. Are there any weapons in your house? Nope. Can you stay on the phone with me? Nope. See you soon. Thanks. As we dispatch the call, I check the history at the address and see there are multiple previous domestic violence calls. The officer arrives and finds a couple. Female was kind of banged up, and boyfriend was drunk. Officer arrests him after she explains that the boyfriend had been beating her for a while. I thought she was pretty clever to use that trick. Definitely one of the most memorable calls. Story 2. I wasn't a 911 operator, but a supervisor for AT&T's Oreo Info directory information. Think 411. While remotely listening in on some agents one evening, one particular call was escalated to Tier 2 for assistance. On the other end of the line was a woman who was hysterical, saying her husband was trying to kill her. Protocol dictates that we trace the number to the local LEC, local exchange carrier, and notify law enforcement in the area. We do this, but we had no way to connect the call to the local sheriff dispatch. Silly, I know, but we technically weren't true operators and our equipment didn't support that functionality. Basically, we had to act as a relay between the LEO and the victim on the phone. By this time, I had moved from my office to seat myself next to the Tier 2 agent to help her keep her cool while everything was going down. The agent, let's call her April, because that's her name, was handling the call very well at first, but started to lose her as the call progressed. While listening in on the call next to April and trying to convey what is going on to the LEO on the other line, we hear the woman who initially called in say, her, he went to get an axe. Us, ma'am, where are you now? Her, I'm locked in the bathroom. Please hurry. Us, the sheriff's office is on their way. They say they are 5 minutes out. Then we hear loud banging on the door. Her husband was trying to chop his way through the door with the axe. April lost it when she heard the woman start screaming, knowing her husband was coming after her with an axe. She threw her headset off and walked away saying something like, I can't do it, Lucky Inc. I can't. April heads off to the ladies' room to collect herself. So I pick up the headset to reassure the lady on the phone. Me, ma'am, the sheriff is at your house now. Where is your husband? Her, back bathroom. He is at the door. More loud banging from the axe. By this time, the woman was overly hysterical and crying madly. Then, Sheriff's Department, drop the axe. Sheriff's Department, drop the damn axe. Pop, 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 pop. The local LEO dispatch directed me to ask the lady open the bathroom door, and she does. The next voice I heard on her phone was a sheriff deputy. All he said was this: the situation is under control, operator. Disengage the call. I still get chills and all teary thinking about it. Edit. Okay, I get it. I said, local LEC. Local exchange carrier, akin to rip in peace. You're each so very clever for pointing that out. Story 3. Hi guys, I actually am a 911 operator. First ever 911 I answered was about a naked man sitting in a bathtub on the side of the road in the middle of nowhere. He was drunk, and we still don't know where he got the tub. Edit. West Tennessee, since everyone keeps asking. Story 4. The one that stayed with me gave childbirth instructions to a deaf father via relay for his deaf wife. They were the victims of a home invasion and were tied to chairs. Burglars saw her in labor, panicked, then left. Took dad hours to free himself and call. While giving the instructions, I obtained a suspect description to put out to surrounding agencies. They were caught in the city to our north during the call. Baby boy was born perfectly healthy. Edit. Obligatory. Thank you for the gold. Story 5. I worked in a call center a few years ago. Not for 911, but for general purchases for car parts. Anyway, some guy phones me asking for a car part. Find the part number and place the order as I would normally do. I then hear him sigh and begin to cry. Naturally, I ask if everything is okay, and his response is, you don't want to listen to my problems, mate. Me being a kind guy who wanted to get rid of some of his shift, I said, sure, what's up? And ended up having so many feels. Turns out his wife had motor neuron disease and had very recently passed away, and he was fixing up her car to sell it on. He said it got to the stage where she couldn't walk, then couldn't speak, couldn't do basic tasks such as dress herself, shower, etc. Eventually, she didn't even recognize his face and the disease ultimately took her. He then tells me about how he has to move house as he can't stand to be in the property without his wife anymore, and that he had $80,000 worth of pills in a drawer that he had nothing to do with. He said he will probably donate them to charity. Anyway, after about a 50-minute conversion with him, he was so glad that he asked for the company address. Now I was new on the job, so didn't realize the dangers of disclosing this information, but I gave it to him. And that Christmas I received a card from him saying thanks for taking the time to listen to him, and that it really helped him get through a tough time just speaking to someone about it. So yeah, he was such a nice guy, and I will remember him for the rest of my days because he really made an impact on me with his story. TLDR. Guy orders car parts. Cries. I proceed to have so many feels. Edit. Oh my goodness. My first gold, thank you so much. I honestly never expected such a great response. Edit 2. Relearning about motor neuron disease and having so many flashbacks of the guy's explanation as to what it does exactly, etc. Wouldn't wish this upon your worst enemy. Edit 3. I'd like to thank everyone for all the nice comments and PMs I'm receiving. Also, the hourly rate for the car part therapist has increased from free to $150 per hour. Story 6. Harley motorcycle tipped over and the clutch lever went into a 4-year-old's eye. Parent was on the line asking what to do. Suddenly, she said, "They're going lift the motorcycle." I emphatically told her to tell them to stop and wait for rescue and EMS. Rescue ended up cutting off the clutch lever and transporting the kid to hospital. She underwent surgery. That was 1982. Just last year, I met the lead rescue officer and the girl herself, now fully grown. They wanted to meet the 911 operator that saved her vision. Story 7. My wife wakes up crying once in a while after dreaming about certain of her calls. It's always either, "Mommy won't wake up," or "I backed over my boy." She has not been on the job for 15 years. Some things just leave marks. Story 8. I'm actually a police call taker. Throwaway. Because it's about time I made one and because confidentiality. But sorry, the reason you're not getting many real answers is because we can't talk about much. Got a call just yesterday on the non-emerge line from a very old, very proud German-Canadian man who just babbled on for 5 minutes straight about having come to Canada before WOM in a boat with windows and helped build Canada and loved Harper, and he built skyscrapers and was a plumber and blah blah blah, and would not be interrupted. I just sat back on mute and laughed my off. When I finally went to kick him off the line, he finished with, "Long live our mayor. Long live Canada. I love everybody. I love this place." Story 9. I was a 911 dispatcher for several years, and one of my most memorable calls was a hysterical woman at about midnight one stormy night. She was absolutely incomprehensible. I kept saying, ma'am, you have to calm down. I can't understand you, ma'am." This went on for what felt like forever. I couldn't get anything useful out of her. My officers were en route to this obviously horrifying situation. Finally, she said something about being with her sister. "How old is your sister?" 1. Instantly suspicious, I asked, "How old are you?" 5. A 5-year-old boy. So that's how I inadvertently called a little boy ma'am many times. Oops, the storm had woken him up and his parents were gone. They went out to move their cars to shelter in case of hail. He was just very scared. My officers still responded and talked to the parents about not leaving sleeping children alone, but everybody was unscathed. It wasn't my most tragic call, but it is one I've never forgotten. Poor little ma'am. Story 10. Before my grandma died, we had to call 911 to get her to the hospital. An older lady, for some reason still an EMT, or first responder, I forgot, came to the house. She had trouble getting up all the stairs to the front door and fell backwards. She thought she hit her head, so she touched it and saw blood all over her palm. In reality, she just scraped her hands but thought the blood was from her head, so she fainted. We had to call another ambulance. Story 11. I have a couple, but the one that takes the cake, so to speak, is this one. So background. I worked in a very busy city, so shooting, raping, robberies, etc. were not a novelty, but a norm, unfortunately. We were used to it, and I have heard several people die with me on the phone. This lady, though. So she calls and says, "My husband has a gun to my head and won't leave him alone. You gotta come quick." She's screaming into the phone, then she puts it down. All I can hear at this point is her yelling at her husband, "But I love you, baby." Then boom, gunshot. "But I love you." Boom, gunshot. Something garbled. "But I love you." Boom, gunshot. So at this point, I'm standing up yelling into my little microphone, "Stop saying I love you." And everyone in the room with me now turns and looks at me like I have 5 heads. But I was caught up in the call. Turns out the man walked in on the woman and found another guy in the closet. Said guy ran out of the house, but the woman didn't make it out alive. Story 12. Sue. As a med student, I worked as an emergency phone operator for night shifts. One unusually quiet night, I had a call at about 3 a.m. A nice old lady was asking for just somebody to talk to because she had insomnia and just woke up from a terrible nightmare. Now, usually I was pissed when something like this happened. People calling in the middle of the night for some bullshit that clearly isn't a medical emergency. But this old woman was so sweet and polite that I decided to just have a nice talk with her. Also, all the other lines were quiet at that time. She told me her name and that ever since her husband was sent to a nursing home several weeks ago, she was afraid that something terrible might happen to him. About 1 hour ago, she awoke and just felt that something bad had happened, and now she felt so anxious and alone at home. Just wanted to hear a human voice. Someone to talk to. She kept excusing herself for calling in the middle of the night and wasting my time. Then I got a call on the second line. It was the nursing home where her husband was sent. Yo, we got a dead here. Died 1 hour ago. Send over the doctor for a death certificate. Needless to say, the man who just died had the same last name as the nice lady I had been talking to. Story 13. I know Reddit has a habit of, I'm not X, but my grandma's dog is X. But having said that, I am not an emergency phone operator, but my dad was a phone operator for the Samaritans. I remember him coming home one morning visibly shaken up. I found him later in the day crying, the only time I have ever seen him cry. He never returned to the Samaritans. He has only ever told me some of the details of the phone call, but never the full story. He had spent 5 or 6 hours on the phone to a young woman as she drank and took sleeping pills and cut herself. She'd had a terrible life. I don't know any of the details. But she passed away while on the phone to my dad. He said that he felt so powerless, so unable to do anything for this young woman as she died in front of him. Story 14. I used to work as a relay operator, 711, and often got misdialed 911 calls. We would connect them to 911, but since they connected through us, we had to stay on the line. One time, I got an old woman who fell out of bed and couldn't get up. I connected her to 911, and from there, they tracked her location. The 911 operator is like, "Ma'am, are you in such and such hospital? Are you calling from the hospital?" "Yes. I fell and no one will help me." Not sure what the 911 operator did, but about 10 minutes later, you hear someone come into her room to help her up. Apparently, this woman fell out of her hospital bed and no one noticed for over an hour, until she dragged herself to the phone and called 911. I was like, note to self, never go to this hospital. Story 15. My first call I ever had to dispatch on the radio. 2 homeless dudes blowing each other on the bus. I'm sorry it's not serious or traumatic, but it will always stay with me. Story 16. 911. Dispatcher here. I took a call once of a house being on fire. So of course we send fire department out. Soon as they arrive on scene, they ask for the police to respond. Police don't typically respond to this area with FD. Turns out the story was that a girl's fiance arrives home and dumps gas on her and lights her in fire. She then runs to the shower to try to put herself out. He follows her, turns the shower off, dumps more gas on her, and lights her back on fire. She then runs through the house, thereby lighting the house on fire. She then runs out of the house as FD arrives on scene. So when FD pulled up, they had arrived to a body collapsed in the yard on fire. When PD arrives, the male fiancé walks out of the burning house, lets himself into the back of a police car and says, "Take me to jail." Story 17. I can never understand why posts like this get downvoted while stupid, useless questions about get upvoted. Is it really true that Reddit is 80% teenage boys? Story 18. I am a 911 operator. My favorite call I have personally took that I won't forget is about a couple at McDonald's. They had just purchased a new vehicle and went out to celebrate the purchase at a local MacD. The wife for some reason decided she had better check the spare tire and make sure they had one before they left town and found a gun instead. I received a call from the wife stating she just accidentally shot her husband. When I was asking about exit wounds, she said it did not penetrate but burned him real badly. Turns out wife shot the husband with a flare gun when she went to show it to him. They did not finish their Big Macs and I'm not sure how that marriage ended up. He wasn't a happy man on the way to the emergency room to get burn treatment. Story 19. Not 911 operator, but grandma was telephone operator back in the day, when operators actually connected calls. First call ever on first day on the job. Kid zipped his junk in his zipper, and this was back in the days of metal zippers. She said she could hear the kid screaming in the background, so she put it through to the fire department because I figured they were all guys there so they'd know what to do. Story 20. My mom was a 911 dispatcher for over 30 years. She had many crazy calls, but one story she told me always stuck out from the rest. One day a man called in. With a calm voice, he told my mom he was in the local hotel and that he had doused himself with gasoline and was going to kill himself. He called in so they could evacuate the hotel because I don't want to hurt anyone else. While my mom is trying to talk him out of it, she is on another line to the hotel letting them know what's going on and to get everyone out. While emergency services are en route, she has to stay on the line whenever possible to keep people calm, reassure them help is on the way, and to try her best to keep track of what's up on the other end. As soon as the guy heard the sirens coming in the distance, he asked her if everyone had been evacuated yet. She tried to stall her answer, thinking he'd light himself up as soon as she said yes. Didn't work. Seconds later, she stated hearing the worst screams she's ever heard, and she's heard many during that job over the years. And then the phone went static, and then silence. He died in that hotel and mom had to listen. Lousy day. Story 21. Former Sheriff's Department dispatcher in charge of non-emergency and 911 calls for a rural, southern county. I picked up the job part-time and was in the process of training. My supervisor was sitting next to me, listening to my end of the call, but she was not hooked into the line to hear the whole call. Line rings. I answer. It's 911. A young girl, less than 10 years old, is telling me that she, her mother, and her baby sibling are locked in a bedroom. Her uncle is pacing around outside the door, holding a knife and threatening to kill them all. She does not know the house number, fire number where they are, and mom has basically checked out of the conversation out of fear. I have a vague idea of where she is, so I send deputies in her direction with the promise that I will get better directions. As is typical in rural areas, everybody owned a scanner and listened like it was their job. My phone starts ringing off the hook, so I am reassuring this little girl on one handset and holding a second handset up to my other ear, taking directions from concerned members of the public. Directions like, go until you see a broke-down truck. Keep going. When you get to the second broke-down truck, turn right and continue until you see a large rock. It was also late enough in the evening that everything was dark out. The little girl tells me there might be a back door that is unlocked. Members of the public who know the house just from the general location and number gender of occupants are calling in confirming that there is a back door that my deputies should enter through and that they will not be seen by the perpetrator if he has retreated to the living room. My guys arrive, sneak in the back, walk right up to the guy sitting in a recliner, disarm him, and arrest him. Family gets emergency protective orders, so he, ideally, cannot be a threat to them again. I almost quit after that call because my adrenaline was running, I was shaking, and I'd had to handle it mostly myself because my supervisor couldn't hear what was going on. I stayed with it, and it was one of the best jobs I had. I quit when I moved to another state, but it was a sad decision to make. Edit. I would like to add that the whole not being able to find your house in the country thing was extremely common back then, and I cannot speak to current systems in rural areas. I also got extensive public help via scanner listeners the time a home security company called to report a possible break-in or medical emergency, but they only had a billing address on file. No directions to the house whatsoever. If you have any kind of company servicing your home, make sure they have your actual street address, fire number, and a backup, detailed set of directions to your home, including landmarks. I don't want to ever see anyone in an easily preventable emergency because ADP doesn't have the details necessary to send someone to your home. Story 22. Throwaway. My sister is a 911 operator in Southern California and told me this pretty horrifying story. A call came in from a teenage boy, probably 14-15, and said that his father was trying to kill his mother. His father cornered his mother in their bedroom and nailed the door shut from the inside. The boy was frantically trying to break the door down, and you could hear him banging, breaking down on the door, and his mother screaming like she's being brutally beaten. My sister says that they live in a really awkward place that might actually take a little time to get to. So in the meanwhile, this kid finally manages to break down the door and confronts his father. His father turns on him and starts beating him instead of his mother now. After this goes on for about 5 minutes, she doesn't hear the boy anymore but hears the mother crying or whatever, and the father screaming at her. The police finally arrive and arrest the man. Unfortunately, it gets worse. The kid is dead. His father brutally beat him to death for 5 minutes or something like that. There was a news report about it with pictures of the boy, but I couldn't find it anywhere. Seriously. And I know many people will disagree with me and it will probably get me downvoted, but IMO the dad should have to go out the same way he killed his own son. How could someone do something like this? It's so incredibly sickening. Edit. To add more onto what I said previously, I was wrong to have said it. When it comes to kids, I get overly emotional and tend to say things I don't mean. I completely agree with you, Uncle Demon. Story 23. 2 calls come to mind. First, one the guy sitting next to me received a few years ago. First, we were not primary call takers. The sheriff department dispatchers would answer the 911 calls, then transfer and fire or EMS calls to us. Anything involving law enforcement was handled by the SO. He answers. She says she wants to make an appointment to see Dr. So-and-so. He informs her that this is 911, and while we can send her an ambulance, we cannot make doctor's appointments. She says she understands. He asks if she would like an ambulance. She says no. She then says that she just wants to make an appointment, and that next Thursday worked fine for her. My partner again informs her that 911 is for emergencies only. He again offers an ambulance. She again refuses. They go in circles for a while. And here's where it gets interesting. Anyone else would have ended the call, but my partner this evening was one of the smartest dudes I've ever met. He's pretty good at putting little pieces together. So instead of ending the call, he asked one last question. Ma'am, 911 is for emergencies only. Do you understand that? She said that she did. He had a sudden thought and asked her if she was having an emergency. She said yes, with an oddly desperate tone to her voice. He then asked her, "Is there someone standing next to you who is threatening you?" She simply said yes, but you could feel a sort of, "thank God someone figured it out" tone to her voice. We called the sheriff department back and let them know. Apparently, the estranged husband had returned to the house and was threatening her. She was too scared to call and ask for the cops, so she was pretending to call the doctor's office. She's lucky my buddy happened to answer. Story 24. I'm not a 911 operator, but I spent time doing OnStar telematics type stuff, and the moments you remember are those when you're still connected to the vehicle once the dispatch has been made after an accident. I've heard a brother beg for his other brother not to die as he bled out, not sure if he actually did. The one that has stuck with me the most is the one I initially heard the least on, airbag signal, connected to vehicle. I heard a sigh and then silence outside. Nothing but the sounds of passing traffic. A coworker then completes the dispatch, standard procedure, and I attempt to make contact a time or two with no luck. It's simply a matter of remaining on the line to listen to make sure the ambulance gets there. Then, a car stops, and I hear talking in the background. Soon after, someone else stops. Finally, someone starts a last rites type of prayer after asking someone to join hands. I realize then that what I heard at the very beginning of the call was their last breath. The only time that this person's entire existence crossed mine was at the last possible moment, and they don't even know it. Life is fickle. Be good to everyone. Story 25. My mom has been a 911 operator over 30 years. I won't ask her this question, but I will tell you what I know was her hardest call. The pastor at our church helped my mom through so much. When she married, had my sister, then stepdad cheated on her, mentally abused her, then divorced her, and she struggled. But he was so kind, providing when they could around holidays and Christmas so we could have gifts. This was a span of 18 years. He retired, still lived in our community. She got a call from a member of the church who she knew. He and the pastor's wife had been out. They came home, and the retired pastor was on the floor. Wife was screaming, my mom giving CPR instructions while dispatching the fire and medics. He didn't make it. Cardiac arrest. The friend knew my mom answered, but never told anyone. Story 26. One time I called 911 because there were maggots covering a 50-foot radius of a parking lot. Literally hundreds of thousands of these fuckers everywhere. Drunk me was convinced there was a dead body in the dumpster. Story 27. Allow me to offer a funny story in place of these serious ones. I was an intern at a local police department and I was working with dispatch for the day. We received a call from a concerned citizen complaint. Operator, 911. What is your emergency? Citizen, mumble, mumble, mumble. Operator, I'm sorry, ma'am. Could you please speak up? Citizen, I said there's two guys fucking in a parked truck. Operator, yes, ma'am. We'll get someone out there immediately. The operator hung up and we both immediately started laughing. He had the caller on speaker so I could listen. I asked him if he was going to send someone out there and he just shrugged and told me sometimes people need some fun. Edit. My newest most upvoted comment is about butt. Nice. Edit 2. I should talk about butt more often on Reddit. Edit 3. Fucking gold for talking about butt. Reddit. I love you so very much, and thank you most kind and generous stranger. I have much love for you as well. Story 28. I'm not a 911 operator, but I used to produce local news, and I got a call one day that a young man had been beaten to death because the 911 operator wouldn't send someone to the scene when people called for help. I got the 911 tape, and sure enough, that's what happened. The woman who was calling in was hysterical. The operator was getting frustrated. In the background, you could hear the supervisor saying things like, no, she is not talking to us like that. Nah, tell her you are hanging up, girl. Nah, The operator was saying things like, look, either you get it together, or I'm not calling this in. You need to get yourself in order. The woman wasn't being rude, but she was crying. And then she cursed. She wasn't cursing at the operator, but just, oh, they're killing him. Oh, help. The operator, in a very calm tone, says, ma'am, I don't appreciate your language. I'm disconnecting. Call back when you know how to act right. I ran the tape on air. It was big fiasco. The supervisor was suspended but not fired. The kid died and it was questionable whether responding faster would have made a difference. The operator who was actually taking the call was not disciplined. I can't remember. But maybe because her supervisor was egging it on? This happened in my hometown, which is quite literally one of the most miserable places in the country. Got number 7 on the most depressed cities list. The amount of crazy and just human shittiness I saw there was amazing. It happened 20 years ago or so. My blood pressure still rises when I think about it. I don't think I've ever been so pissed off. What petty, crappy people. In fact, I'm getting pissed off all over again now. Still affects me. Several things that happened there still makes my blood run cold. I had to get out. Story 29. Not an operator, but this has got to be one of the more chilling calls I have heard. Person calls 911 because her ex, who is a known offender, is trying to break into her house. Police simply cannot dispatch. Person gets raped. Edit. Part 2. Edit 2. Part 3, thanks. Story 30. Not an actual 911 call, but I did get a 911 call while working at a tattoo shop. A customer calls me, gives me his address, tells me to not ask questions, come over, don't knock, but rather break a window and come on in. What I find is him and his girlfriend were on the bed doggy style. I say, Whoa, I don't mind the show, but I'm not sure if I want to join. Turns out they had gotten their piercings caught. The bar at the base of his had gotten caught in her hoop. Story 31. I had just begun training as a law enforcement radio operator. My friend answered a 911 call about a physical between husband and wife. I dispatched 2 deputies out to the call. Nothing too out of the ordinary, except I could hear the screaming over the phone from the other side of the room. We up it to an emergency response, and the corporal at the time heads over as well. He's first on scene and immediately goes to the door without backup. Right as he gains entry, he screams over the radio, "Shots fired." At this time, the entire district is now heading over 1018. I ask for a status update. Nothing. I ask again. Still nothing. Units get on scene and tell me we have an officer down. I kept my cool, had EMS respond. I kept my cool when they canceled the chopper for trauma code ground transport. I kept my cool when we were debriefed. I kept my cool when my co-workers were all in tears for a few days. But every day on my way to work for a few months, having to read all the signs on the business saying, "R.I.P. Sergeant Wilson," I finally broke down and cried. Story 32. First party caller for shooting victim. Guy was speaking very softly and panicked as he hid in the bushes. He died while I was on the phone with him. Favorite. Complainant advises her girlfriend beat her up real bad. Suspect said she was going to the store to get some more beer, then would be back to finish the job. Another. Years ago, I received a commendation for instructing a caller to remove a freshly delivered baby from the toilet at the nail salon. Seemed like an odd thing to commend given how common sense it was. Story 33. I worked briefly as a 911 operator. We dealt with a lot of North America. A lot of the calls were break-ins, but the one I will always remember was a call from a man in North Carolina. He was harvesting his crops, and some guy walked into his farm and laid down in front of his tractor. You could hear the guy's wife in the background going hysterical. Guy got decapitated and everything. Was a weird experience for me. Story 34. I used to take calls for community nursing teams, and I'd get one particular lady who would ring me up New Year's Day every year without fail to make sure I wasn't pregnant. Not this year, Mary. Not this year. Story 35. It's always the suicidal callers, especially the ones that attempt while on the phone with me. Nothing can describe the feeling of trying to talk someone down than hearing that gunshot, or them saying they just slit their wrists or took all those pills, etc. Story 36. I used to be a police dispatcher. 2 stick out. Neither were calls that I directly took, but I heard the audio. The first came at about 3 a.m. An older man called the non-emergency number and very calmly, nonchalantly said, "I just killed my neighbor. Shot her with a shotgun. You might want to come pick her up." The second was a 911 call from an elderly woman. She called, frantic, because she thought her daughter was trying to break into her house. She told the call taker to hold on and put the phone down. On the recording, you can hear a scream, followed by a thud. Then there's a buzzing sound that goes on for several minutes, then stops. Finally, you hear a low roar that slowly builds and builds until it's all you can hear. After about 5 minutes of that, the line goes dead. Come to find out, her daughter was severely mentally ill. She broke into her mother's house, bludgeoned her to death, the thud, tried unsuccessfully to cut off her head with an electric carving knife, the buzzing, then set the house on fire, the roar. The line goes dead when the fire destroyed the phone. The responding officers found the daughter hiding in a park adjacent to the house, covered in blood. I wish I was making that up. Story 37. I'm actually the caller on this one, but it's a pretty wild story. I was, still am, a DJ in my hometown. One night we had a party to benefit the Aurora shooting victims in a local barn that the owners let us rent for charity events and such. Everyone there was white girl wasted, and there was a huge turnout. So the party ends, and me and my buddies were chilling outside smoking some celebratory cigars when a train passes by. The barn wasn't more than 50 feet away from the tracks, and no more than 500 feet away from the railroad crossing. The train passes, and we notice that the crossing guards haven't gone up. 10 minutes later, they still haven't stopped making that god-awful bell noise. Being the curious teenagers that we were, we decided to go try and lift the guards up and fix the faulty crossing. I ran ahead first, full speed along the side of the tracks, but upon getting closer, I noticed somebody lying in the middle of the rails. I thought some drink guy from the party had just stumbled over there and taken a nap. Well, I was partly right, but he had been napping for a while because I looked down at his legs to see they had been cut clean off by the passing train. I immediately get on the phone with 911 while my bodies tried to get a response from him. We were EMT cert, and we waited what seemed like hours for the M's to show up. Later, I heard the name of the PT over police radio, and it had been one of my friends since 4th grade. Oh, and the only reason the railroad crossing got stuck, I found out later, was due to his body being dragged along the track and disconnecting one of the sensor cables. I probably won't ever forget that night. Edit. I should also say that the guy lived. He has prosthetic legs and is doing great today. He handled the whole thing better than I could believe. I haven't talked to him in a while, but I get some updates over Facebook.